MRSA defense marijuana extracts kill antibiotic-resistant MRSA without a hot. By Nora Schultz, September 12, 2008. Substances harvested from cannabis plants could soon outshine conventional antibiotics in the escalating battle against drug-resistant bacteria. The compounds, called cannabinoids, appear to be unaffected by the mechanism that superbugs like MRSA use to evade existing antibiotics. Scientists from Italy and the United Kingdom, who published their research in the Journal of Natural Products last month, say that cannabis-based creams could also be developed to treat persistent skin infections. Cannabis has long been known to have antibacterial properties and was studied in the 1950s as a treatment for tuberculosis and other diseases. But research into using cannabis as an antibiotic has been limited by poor knowledge of the plant's active ingredients and by the controversy surrounding its use as a recreational drug. Now Giovanni Appendino of the Piedmont Orientale University, in Italy, and Simon Gibbons of the School of Pharmacy at the University of London, UK, have revisited the antibiotic power of marijuana by systematically testing different cannabinoids' ability to kill MRSA. MRSA, short for methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, is a bacterium that can cause difficult-to-treat infections since it does not respond to many antibiotics. Many healthy people carry S. aureus on their skin, but problems arise when multi-drug-resistant strains infect people with weak immune systems through an open wound. In the worst cases, the bug spreads throughout the body, causing a life-threatening infection. To make matters worse, resistance to antibiotics is rapidly increasing, and some strains are now even immune to vancomycin, a powerful antibiotic that is normally used only as a last resort when other drugs fail. But when Appendino, Gibbons, and their colleagues applied extracts from 5 major cannabinoids to bacterial cultures of 6 strains of MRSA, they discovered that the cannabinoids were as effective at killing the bugs as vancomycin and other antibiotics. The cannabinoids even showed exceptional activity against the MRSA strain that makes extra amounts of the proteins that give the bugs resistance against many antibiotics, says Gibbons. These proteins, he explains, allow the bacteria to hoover up unwanted things from inside the cell and spit them out again. Conveniently, of the 5 cannabinoids tested by the researchers, the 2 most effective ones also happen to be non-psychoactive, meaning that they cannot cause a high. What this means is, we could use fiber hemp plants that have no use as recreational drugs to cheaply and easily produce potent antibiotics, says Appendino. In an attempt to discover how the cannabinoids kill MRSA, the team manipulated several chemical groups within the compounds. Most of the changes did not affect the antibiotic activity at all, and those that did seem to influence only how well the cannabinoid is taken up by the bacterial cells. Everything points towards these compounds having been evolved by the plants as antimicrobial defenses that specifically target bacterial cells, says Gibbons. But the actual mechanism by which they kill the bugs is still a mystery. We've tested whether the cannabinoids affect common antibiotic targets like fatty acid synthesis or the DNA-bending enzyme DNA gyrase, but they don't. I really cannot hazard a guess how they do it, but their high potency as antibiotics suggests there must be a very specific mechanism. Appendino and Gibbons say that cannabinoids could quickly be developed as treatments for skin infections, provided the non-psychoactive varieties are used. The most practical application of cannabinoids would be as topical agents to treat ulcers and wounds in a hospital environment, decreasing the burden of antibiotics, says Appendino. Whether the cannabinoids could also be delivered in the form of an injection or in pills is less clear, the pair says, because they may be inactivated by blood serum. Frank Bowling of the University of Manchester, who has had success treating MRSA-infected wounds with maggots, says that any alternative treatment that removes MRSA from the wound and prevents it from spreading into the body is fantastic and preferable to using antibiotics that have strong side effects and against which resistance is already developing. He cautions, however, that the researchers still need to show that the cannabinoids are safe to use. This is not something that Appendino is too concerned about. The topical use of cannabis preparations has a long tradition in European medicine, and no allergies have been reported. Mark Rogerson of GW Pharmaceuticals, a UK-based company that develops cannabinoid-based drugs to treat severe pain caused by multiple sclerosis and cancer, says that the discovery that cannabinoids kill MRSA really underlines the potentially great diversity of medical applications that cannabis-based medicine can have. You can almost think of the cannabis plant as a mini-pharma industry in its own right. But Rogerson says that it is unlikely that existing cannabis-based medicines could be used to treat MRSA because the exact effect will depend on the correct combination and dosage of cannabinoids. Meanwhile, Appendino and Gibbons hope that antibacterial effectiveness could also make cannabinoids suitable preservatives for cosmetics and toiletries. The golden standards of preservatives are parabens and chlorinated phenols, says Appendino, but these compounds do not degrade well in the environment and are strongly suspected to be hormonal modifiers. He also argues that, since all major cannabinoids are similarly effective, complete purification of a single compound isn't necessary. So semi-purified cannabinoid mixtures extracted from non-psychoactive plants could make a cheap and easy alternative to conventional preservatives. When it comes to marijuana legalization, we should be talking more about antibiotics. Studies have shown that compounds in cannabis effectively kill current antibiotic-resistant superbugs like MRSA. The majority of the arguments surrounding marijuana legalization focus on psychoactive THC. In general, anti-marijuana activists don't want to legalize yet another mind-altering substance. But, focusing the legalization conversation on THC alone ignores perhaps one of the most important qualities of the cannabis plant, its antibiotic and antiseptic properties. What is antibiotic resistance? Photo credit: only 2 new class of antibiotics have been introduced in the past 30 years. This fact is quite scary, especially considering that we developed 20 new classes between 1940 and 1962. Bacteria and microbes evolve at a much faster rate than we're able to intelligently prevent them. As far as antibiotics go, it's us versus nature, and nature is winning. An antibiotic is a tool that we can use to kill off the majority of harmful bacteria in any given body or space. Where we get into trouble is with the remaining bacteria that survive. These bacteria are the strongest of the bunch, and they continue to multiply with their antibiotic-resistant genes. We've been abusing antibiotics for quite some time. Antibiotic resistance really began shortly after we first started mass-producing them. In a famous example, a round of penicillin was preemptively dispatched to prostitutes near army bases in Vietnam in order to prevent soldiers from getting gonorrhea. Shortly after, a new strain of penicillin-resistant gonorrhea popped up. Gonorrhea is now resistant to many different antibiotics. This has been extremely concerning for the U.S. Center for Disease Control, which has issued several laboratory recommendations to halt the progression of resistance. Back in 1935, cannabis tablets were used to treat gonorrhea. But, the 1937 Marijuana Tax Act put an end to the medical distribution of cannabis in the U.S. The era also lacked the scientific means to extract and test the individual antibiotic properties of the herb. This meant that cannabis was not isolated as an effective cure, but rather a way to mitigate some of the symptoms. Today, there are 5 major reasons why we continue to lose the battle against bacterium and microbes: overprescription of antibiotics by doctors, overuse of antibiotics in animal agriculture, improper consumption of antibiotics by patients, overuse of household products that contain antibiotics, overuse of cosmetics and toiletries that contain antibiotics. No studies have come out recently that test the efficacy of specific cannabinoids against gonorrhea using modern technology. But, compounds found in weed have been found to kill off some of the most major superbugs of our time. MRSA. Note: this video contains graphic images of MRSA wounds. Methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, MRSA, is an extremely painful type of staph infection that is difficult to treat. Some strains of MRSA are even immune to vancomycin, the strongest antibiotic that we have as a human species. Vancomycin is only used as a drug of last resort. MRSA can lead to a very serious systemic bacterial infection if it makes it into an open wound. This is an infection that can lead to permanent disability if not cleared. We're talking years of physical therapy, excruciating long-term stays in the hospital, and even death in those with weakened immune systems. As early as 2008, scientists in Italy and the UK found that 5 of the most common cannabinoids were effective at killing 6 different strains of MRSA. The cannabinoids they tested are cannabidiol, CBD, cannabichromene, CBC, cannabigerol, CBG, delta-9-tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, cannabinol, CBN. In their research, study authors Giovanni Appendinothese and Simon Gibbons found something amazing. These cannabinoids are as effective as vancomycin when it comes to killing MRSA. They also do so in a different way than what we commonly expect from antibiotics, making them especially meaningful when it comes to treating microbial infections.
This is the WebMD website, written by doctors.
Chemicals in marijuana may be useful in fighting MRSA, a kind of staph bacterium that is resistant to certain antibiotics. Researchers in Italy and the UK tested 5 major marijuana chemicals called cannabinoids on different strains of MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. All 5 showed germ-killing activity against the MRSA strains in lab tests. Some synthetic cannabinoids also showed germ-killing capability. The scientists note the cannabinoids kill bacteria in a different way than traditional antibiotics, meaning they might be able to bypass bacterial resistance. At least 2 of the cannabinoids don't have mood-altering effects, so there could be a way to use these substances without creating the high of marijuana.